I grew up with a dad who had schizophrenia and bipolar. Seeing him in psychiatric intensive care in the PIC unit, they called it, was just devastating for me. This was the lowest of the low. He's in the rubber room screaming, crying. It was just one of the worst experiences of my life. I considered suicide. So much of my identity was based on being that MD, and I thought that I would die without it. And what I've learned is being an MD is part of me, but it's not all of me.
Welcome to the Med Story Podcast, where we share the stories of the greatest minds in science and medicine. I'm your host, Spencer Locke. Let's begin. All right, Dr. Russell Kennedy, I want to welcome you onto the show.
Thanks, Spencer. You can call me Russ or Dr. Russ or whatever you prefer.
Okay, sounds good. So let's get right into this.
Sure.
You are a doctor that has dealt with anxiety for many, many years yourself.
Yeah.
Why do you think you had to deal with this, and where did it come from?
Well, I grew up with a dad who had schizophrenia and bipolar, and about every 6 to 18 months, he would go off the rails. He would either go into a deep psychotic depression, I'm laughing here, or mania, or psychosis. So my childhood was sort of, how's my dad doing? And my family was kind of oriented around how the dad was doing as well, right? So I have a brother, my mom. So a lot of the energy went into how's dad doing, and if he was feeling kind of happy, we think, oh, is he heading into mania? Like, what's going on here? Or if he was starting to get sad, it's like, oh, is he going to lapse into depression? Now, most times he was just going through normal human emotions, but sometimes he would actually, decrescendo or decompensate into some sort of mental illness where he'd need to be hospitalized and that kind of thing. So I think a lot of my worries came around two things. One is, am I going to wind up like him? Because I knew there was a genetic component to schizophrenia and bipolar. And two, just dealing with the uncertainty of him and just being born with a sensitive nervous system. My brother has been able to sort of dodge a lot of this stuff. He was there for all of the craziness, but he seems to be a lot more emotionally balanced than I ever was. Now, I think that's switched. I think I'm more emotionally balanced than he is now because I've done all this work. But in general, I think it came from, growing up with a dad who was, mentally kind of unstable. And I think the worst part, maybe not to sort of drone on too long, was that he could be very loving and kind and caring and playful and fun, and then he could go completely the other way, not abusive or violent, but just I can't connect with him. So I think there was a lot of, it almost hurt even more because if someone was consistently difficult with you, after a while you learn how to armor up, right? But if someone's really caring and loving and kind, and then all of a sudden you lose them, every time, you lose a little chunk of yourself, I think, in that. And I think over the course of time, that just kind of ate away at me and just with my sensitive nature, just caused me to sort of focus on the negative all the time.
Can you take me to a moment, maybe growing up, where you had to deal with your father and you were feeling maybe those overwhelming emotions of anxiety or fear?
Yeah, I remember being interested in medicine at a very young age. So I understood a lot about how mental illness worked. So they actually let me into the psychiatric intensive care unit because I used to talk to my dad's doctors about his medications and all this kind of stuff. But just seeing him like in the proverbial rubber room kind of thing really affected me in a really profound way. Because I think I've always created this image that I know more than I do. So I think they kind of let me into this, and this would have been 1975. So this would never happen today. But just, seeing him in psychiatric intensive care in the PIC unit, they called it, was just devastating for me because it was just, this was, the lowest of the low. He's in the rubber room, essentially, kind of screaming, crying. And it was just one of the worst experiences of my life.
How old were you at the time?
15.
15.
Yeah.
Do you remember what was going on through your head as you had to experience that at that age?
I think I was in shock, Spence. I think I was just like kind of when he would go through these episodes of decompensation, either mania or depression, and often the mania was worse in a lot of ways because we just didn't know what the hell he was going to do. I think there was this sort of shock state, and I think I still maintain that. I think in a way, when I first graduated medicine and worked in an emergency department at a local hospital here, one of the smaller ones, it was good for me because I'd gone through hell. Like, things would come in that would be very serious, but I could get into this sort of zone where nothing from the outside got me until, the thing was over. And then I'd kind of, have a bunch of tears or collapse or whatever it was. But during the crisis itself, there was no better person around than me. And I'm still like that for all my friends. My friends still, whenever they go through crisis, they always call me or text me or say, can we go for lunch? Can we go for coffee? And I know it's not just lunch and coffee. I know that their marriage is, suffering, or they hate their job and they've got to get out or something like that. So people have always kind of come to me that way for just support. And I think I'm realizing now that that's sort of my spiritual dharma, is to kind of shepherd people into a place of, real instability, to a place where they can actually see healing. They're not healed yet, but they can actually see the platform that they can create to heal themselves. Because really, it comes down to healing yourself. That's really what it comes down to. No psychiatrist, no doctor, whatever is going to do it for you. And I think we live in a society that makes us think that, doctors have all the answers. But we're starting to see on social media, because doctors are really getting the crap beat out of them now on social media, just all this, you don't look at root cause and you don't do that. There's a lot of stuff that doctors don't get right. Absolutely. But there's a lot of stuff that they still do get right. And I think it's one of those, it's like police, they're demons until you need one. Right?
It's interesting that you say that, because I want to go back to how your friends go to you for this, in times of need, because I actually feel similar. I feel that I can be a safe place for people. And I find that there's this balance of, it feels really good to be there for them. I love to work them through this. But I've also found, and I wondered, is it something that I feel more comfortable helping others rather than helping myself?
Absolutely. And usually, I don't know about your childhood, but for me, my mother was this very reserved Scottish registered nurse, and very competent, very organized. There wasn't a whole lot of I love yous. It was kind of like, well, I put food on your table and a roof over your head, so you must know you're loved, which is basically, I think, what she got as well. So it is one of those things where I kind of looked after my mom and I looked after my dad. And I think that I got very good at reading other people. Made me a very good doctor, makes me a very good friend. But exactly what you're saying, I think there's only so much, there's a finite amount of energy in, awareness. And if you're putting 80, 90% of it outward, you get very good at that. But the flip side is that you're only at 10% for yourself, and you don't really get to know yourself. And I think we develop all these sort of personality traits, people pleasing, never being able to say no, overworking, overachieving, as a compensation to not being able to give yourself what you truly need.
That is articulated beautifully. And I can definitely relate to that. I played a role where, as there was conflict in the marriage, I became the mediator.
Right.
And here these were these two most important people in my life. And I felt valuable. I felt like I was able to help them.
Totally.
And that's carried out through my life. But I want to...
And how old were you when that started?
I was probably... in my teens, like early teens. Yeah. And I'm like, looking back, I'm like grateful for it because it's taught me a lot about conflict resolution. But at the same time, you wonder, right?
Yeah. I mean, the maturation, the human brain matures in a certain fashion, and it needs to get these certain building blocks. And I think when we devote our attention outward like that in people pleasing or looking after our parents, I think we kind of take a detour off that maturation platform. And I think part of us, gets lost at that point. I've been divorced twice, so I know that my relationships didn't go as well as they could because I didn't know myself very well. And I think that there's a real trade-off to these sort of things, is to, I'm really good at reading other people and giving them what they need. But I'm also, because it was a survival state for me, right? I had, like you said, there's some control in that. In this completely chaotic, uncontrollable environment, I had some control in that I was the caregiver. And the reason I think I became a professional stand-up comedian was the way I would connect with my mother is I would make her laugh. She loved English humor, Monty Python, Faulty Towers, all that kind of stuff. And I got very good at making her laugh. And even in her last days, like she passed away about 6 months ago. And even in her last days, I saw the compulsion to make her laugh. And I was really able to sort of take an overview of, oh, this was your relationship, a lot of your relationship. And there's nothing wrong with that too, because it was very connecting. Like we saw, I took her to see Norm Macdonald. I took her to see Jerry Seinfeld. I took her to see these comedians because we loved comedy together. And it was a real bond for us. But it was just really one of those things where I felt like I had to look after my mother and my father. And I think there's probably a story in that too. I think they looked after me as well. I just didn't, it's that whole perceptual thing that we have. Like we have a certain story in our mind, and mine is that I looked after both my parents, but truly they actually looked after me as well. I just don't acknowledge that half of the story probably as much as I should.
All right. So I'm starting to see a theme here. Do you feel, because anxiety as a whole is something that feels that it is becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on, yet we are more educated more than ever. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that this is happening?
Because the rules are going. So I think society, as human beings, when you're 2 or 3, you don't hit your brother, right? You share. There's certain rules that we are shown from the time we are toddlers. And those rules are now gone. You look, there's no accountability for, these political figures doing whatever they want. There's no accountability. Climate change is real. No, it's not. We should have abortion. No, we should. There's all these sort of structures that have been in place for so many years, and now they're all gone. So people tend to start looking for certainty in that. So they will look towards science. And one of the things in my field with anxiety, we've made tremendous amounts of progress in neuroscience as far as anxiety goes in the last 25 years. Very little of that has actually gone into the therapist's office. So we know about the default mode, we know about the amygdala, we know about the insula, we know about these things, but practically nothing's really changed. And I think that we're leaning so much on science-based therapies. When I really look at them, they're really just coping strategies, most of them. They're trying to treat a feeling problem with a cognitive solution. So a lot of anxiety, depression, OCD is a subcortical entity. So a lot of the subcortical entities, anxiety being one of them, don't speak verbal language. Their language is feeling. So we change that by using feeling as well. We speak in its own language. We speak in those subcortical parts of the brain and the body that are mediating the anxiety. So all the talking in the world doesn't really penetrate into those subcortical structures. The amygdala doesn't understand language. So why are we trying to calm it down with language? Why are we trying to understand all this insight-based psychotherapy? Yeah, it all stays in the top part of the brain. But it's the bottom part of the brain, just to break things in a gross generalization, that houses these programs. So this is the reason I think why cognitive therapies help initially, but they don't really help us long term. And science-based therapies are very cognitive. They're very reductive. They don't really allow for the spirit, the human spirit, which is basically what heals you. What I see in 30 years of, anxiety therapy for people is that it's the spirit that heals us. It's not the science. And I think as the structures disintegrate, we lean more on, okay, well, what's real? Well, science is real, but we're kind of being led down this path that science is going to heal our emotional difficulties when it won't. It'll help us cope with it, but it's not really going to help us heal it. Now, I know that was a rant, but it just kind of what I feel about it. It's like we really have to sort of connect with ourselves, because I believe that anxiety is more of a state of alarm held in the body. And the mind is just making sense of that. The mind is a compulsive meaning-making machine, so that when we feel this alarm in our body, the mind has to do something with that. So if we feel alarmed, we feel afraid in our body, the mind goes, what do we have to be afraid of? And I love the David Goggins quote that says, your mind has a tactical advantage over you. It knows your worst fears. So when this alarm comes up in your body, and you may not even be aware of it, then the fears start. And the fears are pretty intense because you made them and you're afraid of them. And we get stuck into our minds, believing that our minds are the cause of the anxiety when really they're just a symptom. I
How
know that
did
was a
you
rant too.
how did you come up with this, right? Because,
LSD.
you okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Tell me about it.
sure. So back in 2013, I had ruptured my left Achilles tendon. I was burned out of medicine, and I needed a way out. So a friend of mine took me on this, I'm shortening this quite a bit, took me on this LSD trip. So I had been, trying everything for my anxiety, CBT, ACT, HIJK, L-P, you name it, I did it for anxiety. And it wasn't helping. So my friend took me on this LSD trip. And as I came out of LSD, I got this message that said, your anxiety is actually in your body. It's in your solar plexus. It's hot. It's purple. It's crystalline. It's sharp. It pushes up into your heart. It pushes back into your spine. That's your anxiety. And I didn't know what to do with that right away. But then once I realized that my anxiety was more to do with my body than my mind, then I started using sort of techniques and strategies to connect with my body and connect with that sense of alarm that's in my body. And that's when I really started to heal. And that's when I wrote my book, Anxiety RX. And that's what I'm sort of doing all this stuff now, is to show people that your anxiety is actually not a mind problem. It's a body problem. It's a feeling problem. Your mind is just making sense of it by creating all these warnings, what ifs, and worst case scenarios that you believe. And then when you believe those, it just makes the alarm in your body even worse. And you get into this alarm anxiety cycle. Because anxiety is really not one thing, it's two. It's the worries of your mind, but it's also this state of alarm that's been there since you've been, a young person. And the two loop on each other. So to heal from anxiety, we have to break them apart. And I have this sort of mantra that I teach all my anxiety patients is sensation without explanation. So you learn to find the alarm in your body. As I said, with me, it's this purple density in my solar plexus. Some people it's in their throat, some people it's in their heart, some people it's in their belly. And I get them to find it. Like, where is it in your body? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? Does it hurt? Is it a pressure? And then put your hand over it and stay with it and learn how to stay with that sensation without compulsively getting seduced into the worries of your mind. And once you start doing that, then you start breaking the cycle apart. And when you break the cycle apart, now they're in two manageable pieces. There's the worries of your mind and there's the alarm in your body. They're not this loop anymore. They're not this sort of impenetrable, indomitable sort of, I always imagine the ball in the Raiders of the Lost Ark, chasing Indiana Jones. They're not that ball anymore. Now you can break them into pieces. And when you see the pieces, then you can actually start to heal. But until you see it as this sort of combination of two things, and you just try and treat one, it's like whack-a-mole. You treat one and the other just gets worse. So it's just a matter of learning that anxiety of the mind is really the state of alarm in the body. And that's what LSD showed me. And that's what all my work is based on since then. And that's how I really help people understand that it's not their fault. It's basically just your nervous system acting through your body that's telling you you're afraid. And your mind is going, okay, what do we have to be afraid of?
How did your first doctor friend respond to when you told them that you found the cause of anxiety after an LSD trip? Because you have to understand that there's some people that might say, sounds a little crazy.
Yeah. I think I kept it to myself, I think. There was 2 years in there where I went to India. I lived at a temple there. I did ayahuasca. I became a yoga and meditation teacher. So I really went the total woo route for a while, which, medical doctors sort of look at with a bit of like, to start with. And then when I came back, I started really focusing a lot more on neuroscience because my first degree is in neuroscience. So I thought, okay, if I'm going to convince the medical profession of this, I have to speak in their language. So I learned all about the insula, anterior, posterior, default mode network, hippocampus, all these structures in the brain that mediate anxiety. And then I could speak with using that language. And as I spoke with that language, I gained more and more people on the medical side that go, okay, maybe this guy does know what he's talking about. But again, it really comes back to healing emotional disorders is a spiritual practice. And that's what I found in India. And a lot of people get intimidated by that, but I don't think they should, because it's really it's really the part of you that makes you feel who you are. Not to get too woo on you right off the bat, but that's the part of you that makes you feel okay, even though you're feeling anxious or irritable or jealous or whatever. You can see that that's you. That's who you are. You can accept all the nuances of emotion rather than just railroad it down anxiety or depression or OCD or whatever it is. You can start seeing and accepting in yourself that you have polarity. You have, the yin and the yang of all the emotions. And I think a lot of times with anxiety, particularly, any negative emotion gets railroaded down into anxiety without really looking at it closely. And I think what people do is they have this alarm in their system since they've been children, and they don't really understand it. So they try and understand it with sort of scientific terms. And, we can explain it through the amygdala and the hippocampus and the insula and the default mode and the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. We can explain all this sort of stuff. But again, doesn't really lend us to therapeutic measures that actually help people on the sidewalk, like in the real world.
Mm. You mentioned that you did some time in India and you did some studying there.
Yeah.
Is there any moments that stick out to you about really that can kind of point you towards the continued direction you went in?
Mm. These are great questions, Spencer. Yeah, I was enlightened for about 90 minutes one morning. It was like 5:30 in the morning. I went up to the roof of the temple. The sun was coming up, and I could still remember it too. I can still remember sort of the orange kind of yellow haze across the sort of Indian landscape, and just feeling like I'm connected to everything. It sounds kind of cliche, but there was a period where it was just like I didn't think. There was just this being. There was just this presence. I was just there. And I just witnessed like the beauty of everything and how everything all seems to fit together. And I wasn't on any sort of psychedelic or any sort of mind-altering substance at all. But there was just this feeling of just kind of like peace and quiet, and that I could stay in it for the first time, because my mind has always been achieve, 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 achieve all the time. And this India made you just sort of go, and this is before smartphones too. So it was kind of like, what do I have to do here? And normally I would be really irritated, like, okay, what am I going to do today? I've got to figure this out, or I've got to do so much meditation or whatever it was. And it was just being present and being okay with that. And at the end of the 90 minutes, I just sort of spontaneously started to just dance and just be present and feel my feet on the ground and just feel my body actually for the first time, really, because I think so much of my life I have spent trying to avoid the feeling in my body because it's been painful. And when I could feel that, even though it was uncomfortable, even though there was this sense that I don't like this feeling is scary, it's vulnerable, but there was this sense that it's okay. It's all part of everything. It's not personal to you. It's all part of just being a person in the world and getting out of the preconceived constructs that you've lived your life with to that point, and just being free of all of that for about 90 minutes. And then after 90 minutes, I went back to my same old sort of, type A kind of self. But once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. And I think I've gone back to that place many, many times in my life. And I've just gone back to that place. And I took a picture of it. Actually, I took a picture of the rooftop and the sunset. And I still watch it every once in a while, because it really reminds me that nothing really matters. Nothing really matters but presence and just being true to yourself, as cliche and as, woo as that sounds. Then time slows down. You start actually feeling. And I think so many people with anxiety feel like their life goes by so quickly because they live in their heads. They don't really live in feeling. They don't live in their body. And when you live in your head, Indian philosophy calls that vata. It calls it air. There's no boundaries there. There's nothing to hold on to. There's nothing to sort of ground you. And it can be liberating, but it can be very frightening at the same time. So I think it's just understanding that here was a place that I could be, that I could see, and I was okay. I could still feel the alarm, but I was still okay. And I think maybe that was the first time that I could actually feel alarmed and safe at the same time.
I think as all human beings, regardless of culture, we all strive to have those moments of enlightenment where you can feel fully at peace. And I think the real question is that how do we get there, right? And
Mm,
then not only how do we get there, but then how do we maximize the amount of times that we get to experience that in our lifetime? Because
yeah.
if we do, that is a much more fulfilling life in my mind than what a lot of people are living.
Yeah. So have you experienced that sort of, maybe not enlightenment so much, but that place of peace or whatever? Have you been there?
I have been there. And
And what was that like for you?
to feel fully in the moment and to feel that everything around me, including myself, was all one thing,
Hmm.
and to feel that I got lucky enough to be a very, very, very small, maybe small but significant part of it,
Yeah. That's
made
the
me feel
paradox. Yeah.
gratitude, made me
Yeah.
feel grateful.
Yeah. I think that's the paradox, is when you see that you're uh, an inextractable part of it. It's all you. Everything is you, and you are everything. And I think, not to get too philosophical, but I think consciousness uses human beings and animals to experience itself. Consciousness can't experience itself by itself. It needs some sort of agent to be able to act as a mirror for it. And I think that's why we're all made differently. That's why some of us lose our parents when we're 5 years old. Some of us are lucky enough to go through life without a whole lot of trauma. Some people go through life with a tremendous amount of trauma. I think that consciousness tries to experience, it's not personal to us. Like the fact that your dad died or your dad had severe mental illness, it's not personal to me. It's just the way that my particular number came up in the field. And it's like, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do? Like, are you going to collapse? Or are you going to try and, I think that the greatest order is trying to help other people with it. And in helping other people, you help yourself.
Mhm. Yeah. So
And I think you do that.
I appreciate that. And I think
Yeah.
that's why we were having these conversations, you know?
Yeah.
And so, like, there's gonna be people listening to this that like, okay, I want to start doing these things, but it's not in the cards for me to go to India and have this
Sure.
experience. Right. But I
I
am
don't
ready.
recommend it either. It's pretty uncomfortable.
But regardless, there's gonna be many people that listen to this that are anxious themselves.
Sure.
Right. And it may feel crippling to them.
Yeah.
What could be one place that they can maybe start?
Yeah. There is this, I got through med school with acronyms. And the favorite acronym that I created for myself was one called SHOULD. So it's what you should have got when you were younger. So you should have been seen by your parents. You should have been heard by your parents as well. Open to, understood, loved, and defended. Now, many of us didn't get that. So you can give it to yourself now. So I get people to put a picture of their younger self up in their bathroom mirror and be able just to sort of see, just, you don't have to sit there and, oh my God, what was life like? You don't have to really ruminate on that, but you do have to pay attention to that younger version of you. And I think a lot of reason why people are anxious is they separate from that younger version of them, because that's the version that holds all the pain. So if you can say, I see you, and often I'll get people to sort of close their eyes and just sort of see their younger selves. And most people can do this. Like, can you see their eyes? Yes. What are they wearing? Oh, it's this short kind of tube top thing that I had at the lake. Okay. Is this an okay memory? Can you stay there with it? And it's like, yeah, I can say that. What would they say to you if they could talk to you right now? That little younger version of you said, it's like, I'm scared. Okay. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes when the adult sort of starts going back to the child doesn't really trust him, because, we've been adults for 40, 30, 40, 50, sometimes years, and we haven't really gone back to that child. So the child doesn't trust us yet. So it's really consistently saying to that child, what do you need? I want to open to you. I want to understand you. I want to love you. I will defend you now in a way that you weren't defended back then. Because I think a lot of the alarm is the younger version of us that's still inside of us, that never really got closure or weren't able to metabolize the pain that they went through back then. So as adults now, we can show that child they are not back in that situation where they're abused, neglected, abandoned, bullied, whatever. They're not there anymore. But the amygdala and the hippocampus still believes that they are. So it's up to us to find that younger version of us. And that's why pictures are so important. Pictures are very evocative of the younger version of us. And we can really feel them. Like there's a lot of people will look at a picture of themselves and go, oh, I remember this. Oh, I remember that cat. These things are really important because they do get into those implicit sort of subcortical body memories that really house a lot of the way that we look at the world. And the more we can kind of make touchstones and touch points with that younger version of us, because that's the part that's alarmed, the more we can reassure them and show them that, yeah, today, in this moment, we're not in that place back then. We're not in this projected horrible future. We're right in the present moment right now. I'm here with you right now. And it's just getting to that point where you develop this relationship with the younger version of you that's comfortable and kind and loving rather than judging, abandoning, blaming, and shaming. That's the other little thing that I have. I call it jabs. And this is sort of where we judge, abandon, blame, and shame ourselves. And this is the default mode network in the brain. So if you grew up in an environment where your mother said you're too fat, or someone said you're too lazy, you're too dumb, you can't, that gets wired into this sort of inner critic, which is also part of the default mode. So we fall into the default mode maybe hundreds of times a day. And if that default mode was programmed with you're too fat, you're too lazy, you're never going to do this, that's going to make it really, really hard to heal from anxiety, depression, OCD, all that stuff. So it's understanding that, okay, how do we start reframing that default mode into something that's much more kind to us so that when we fall into the default mode, we're programming it rather than it programming us.
Hmm.
Now, this isn't getting into the nuts and bolts of, how I work with people, but it's really understanding that if you're constantly taking jabs at yourself, self-judgment, self-abandonment, self-blame, self-shame, you're never going to be able to heal because you're always going to be in the neurochemistry of victim. Whereas if you look at, and this is another thing that I often tell people, can you look at your anxiety as a challenge instead of a threat? Because if you look at it as a challenge, you'll start creating the neurochemicals of empowerment. If you look at it as a threat, you will look at it with the neurochemicals of fear and victimhood. And each one will perpetuate itself. So it's really, how do you frame things up in a way that you can connect with that younger version of you, give them what they should have gotten back then, and maintain that and develop this relationship? So I often say that anxiety is a separation of your adult self from your child self. And it's a separation of your mind from your body. So this alarm that's held in your body, you don't want to feel that. So what you do is you go into your head and you start worrying or people pleasing or achieving or whatever to avoid this alarm. I'm saying go back with help and find that place of alarm and show that child that's alarmed that they're okay. It's the old Rumi saying, that the cave that you fear to enter has the answers that you seek. And the cave that you fear to enter is going back into that old alarm state. Now, you don't have to revisit your abuse or your abandonment or your neglect, but you do have to find it in your body. You do have to find the sensation in your body, because if we can find the sensation in the body, we're able to kind of get on its own turf, get on its own language. Because it's a fear-based language. It's a feeling-based language. So we have to change that feeling-based language, hippocampus, amygdala, with a feeling rather than just a thinking. Thinking just won't change it enough to make a reasonable difference.
So I want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly, right? We want to go back to a point of us as our younger self.
Yep.
We need to stop jabbing ourselves, stop critiquing ourselves and bringing ourselves down, and instead showing it love. And then identifying how that anxiety not only lives in our mind, but where it lives in our body.
Yeah.
And then addressing that.
You got it.
Yeah.
I know I did a lot of rants there, but yeah, it's really, and awareness is so key, just making that intention to be aware. When you're in that anxious phase and you're starting to go the warnings, the what ifs, the worst case scenarios, it's like, okay, how am I judging myself right now? How am I abandoning myself, separating from myself right now? How am I blaming myself? How am I shaming? Because all anxiety is separation anxiety. I learned that from my mentor in developmental psychology, Gordon Neufeld. All anxiety is separation anxiety. And then I tag onto that. And it's mostly separation from your very own self, because that's really what causes the alarm. And once you can pull your mind and your body and your adult self and your child self back together, the alarm fades. And when the alarm fades, you don't have the same amount of energy, feeding your worries and feeding your default mode and feeding that sort of negative view of the world all the time. And then you can start seeing who you really are without all of this crap that's pulling you down.
Mm. So what could be a daily practice that someone listening to this, something small and digestible that
Sure.
they could start with and then build upon?
Yeah, I would start with a physiological sigh. 2 quick sniffs in through your nose and then a long, slow exhale through your mouth. And then close your teeth so you kind of make a hissing sound. I used to do this with my blood pressure patients. So they'd come in, they get white coat syndrome. I'd do their blood pressure. It'd be like 180 over 90. And then I would say, okay, well, let's do 5 rounds of this together. And as they breathe out through their teeth and make that hissing sound, I said, in your mind's eye, I want you to make the image of an overinflated tire, like deflating, like coming right down. And I think that's that's the entry point of really showing yourself that you actually do have control over where your body goes. There's deeper places to go after that, but it's a really good entry point in your breath is the only conscious link we have to the autonomic nervous system. Some of the old yogis can, of course, adjust their heart rates and all that kind of stuff. But for regular people, your breath is the place that we can start having an actual connection with your autonomic nervous system. Practice that. But here's the thing, Spence. It's like people protect their anxiety because as a child, their anxiety was something that they perceived was keeping them safe. So this is one of the biggest hurdles I have in treating my anxious patients is there's part of the childlike part of them that feels that their anxiety is keeping them safe. So as I move them away from their anxiety, they get more anxious because we're getting rid of an old friend that's really not helping them. So as a start with your body. If you can, when you start getting really worked up about something, go into your body and go, okay, where do I feel this in my body? I know that I've got, my cancer recheck coming up in a month. Okay, where do I feel that? Well, it's kind of up in my throat. It's kind of like a pressury pain. It's maybe the size of a peach. It's hot. It's kind of swollen. It's red. Like really drill down into how this alarm shows up in your system, because the more you can drill down into the particular aspects of it, I believe the more you access it in the sort of subcortical parts of your brain. So that would be sort of the next stage, is like, where do you have the alarm in your body? So when you find yourself wrapped up in all your worries, instead, get out of your head, because your head's never going to solve it. It's never going to solve it. It's going to tell you that it'll solve it, but it never will. So can you at that point go, okay, I need to get out of my head and into my body? And that's hard, because the reason why you went into your head in the first place was to avoid the alarm in your body. So it's learning, hey, you're not a child anymore, and you can do this. And if it's really, really difficult, like some people with serious emotional, physical, sexual abuse histories, by all means, like search out like a somatic therapist or someone who does IFS or someone who does, real therapy, and have them witness this alarm with you so that you're not alone with it, because so many of us felt like we were completely alone with our alarm. And then that kind of builds into the next phase of, okay, first phase is like, can I relax my body with breath? Second phase is, can I find the alarm in my body, which is the younger version of me that's still afraid? Then can I see, hear, open to, understand, love, and defend that part? And this is sort of a graduated process that I take people through. And then you start building confidence that, yes, you can see yourself in the mirror every day. Look at that little version of you and start seeing them with compassion and love and connection. And this is what happens with people. Initially, they put that picture up and they're like, oh, I don't like that part of my life. But over the course of time, they start developing this sort of warm, compassionate view of that younger version of them. And when I hear my patients say that to me, I just melt, because I know they're on the right track. And I know also that they have the ability to heal. If they can look at that little version of themselves without completely, dissociating, then I know that they have the ability to sort of go further and deeper and actually get at the root cause of what's causing their anxiety, as opposed to just learning how to think better, which helps in the short term, but it never heals anybody in the long term.
Mm. So there's going to be people that are dealing with this and they say, wow, I would love to sit down and have
Mhm.
this conversation and go through this with you.
Sure.
However, you're a human, just as everyone
Sure.
else. You have a
Sure.
limited amount of time. You have a limited amount of availability, just
Yep.
as they do. Where can we go from here? What solutions might be out there for them that can help them with this process, but without requiring maybe seeing you specifically?
Yeah, sure. I mean, my book is a good place to start. Anxiety RX. It's a longer book. I really felt like I was probably only going to write one book, and I wanted to put everything into it, which maybe wasn't the best idea, but it's sold well over 150,000 copies now. So I'm on the right track. But Anxiety RX, I think, is a great place, especially if you had trauma when you were younger and you didn't really know, like I did, like how to deal with it. It really helps you understand, hey, it wasn't your fault. This is how your nervous system kind of rewired itself to kind of make the best of the trauma. I also have an online program called MBRX that really helps you find the alarm. There's a meditation in there that, takes you through the process of where this alarm is in your body. There's also a yoga nidra in there that helps you join your adult self with your child self and join your mind and your body. Those things really help give you a grounding process. And then, probably more important, gaining the confidence that you can heal yourself, that you can do this for yourself, which is not to say that therapists aren't helpful. They absolutely are. But an hour out of the 168 hours in a week, with that default mode network kind of pecking away at you, you really have to sort of develop this intention of sort of love and connection for the younger version of you. And it's got to be deep, and it's got to be, it's got to be all encompassing, at least initially, this sort of relentless self-love, which is hard. And it takes a while to cultivate. But once you start it, and once you start seeing how well it works and how much better it feels than just being trapped in the limbo of anxiety, I think people really have some real way of feeling like they have agency and control. Because the worst thing about anxiety is you don't have any control over it. It's going to grab you, it's going to twist you around the washing machine, and eventually it's going to let you go. And that's the worst part. So when you start knowing that you actually have agency in this, you're not just a passive, victim of it, that really helps as well. And I think and then I have an app coming out called Anxiety, I think, which is going to help the short-term anxiety and the long-term anxiety as well, so that we're not just sort of, seeing you through these short moments. We're actually showing you how you heal from this anxiety, as opposed to just kind of, getting these Band-Aids every once in a while. Because I do believe a lot of stuff on the internet, with the breath work. I have nothing wrong with breath work or any of these sort of short-term solutions, but they really are just short term. They don't really heal the deeper reason why you have anxiety in the first place. So
Real quick,
MBRX, I think, is great, and it's not expensive, and I made it that way so that everybody could sort of see a different way of treating their anxiety, because I do think that traditional medicine doesn't really do a good job.
is the app going to be the next version of that, or are they totally separate users?
I think what'll happen is the app is going to be kind of the house that everything's going to sit in. My next book will probably be within the app. There's a lot of meditations in the app, like longer meditations. Like one is on health anxiety, and it's some of the best work I've ever done, showing that health anxiety is more of an uncertainty intolerance than anything to do with your health. It really is important to understand that when you can't understand something, or you feel scared and you're uncertain about something, what you will do is look for a certain thing, which is, a lot of people, oh, I've got a brain tumor. Oh, I've got this, it's like people worry because it makes the uncertain appear more certain. And in your dopaminergic system, you get a little hit from that. Oh, I'm on the right track. But then you've told yourself you have cancer or some horrible thing. So it's really understanding that all you're trying to do with health anxiety is trying to take this uncertain alarm feeling and make it into a concrete entity, which is what people do with health anxiety. It's like they freak themselves out because they think that they have some, stomach cancer like their Uncle Bob or whatever, because that makes sense to the brain. The brain doesn't like free-floating uncertainty, especially with those of us with trauma, because of what free-floating uncertainty meant to us when we were younger. And people with anxiety hate uncertainty almost more than anything else. So people with anxiety will pick a horrible worry as opposed to just leaving something uncertain. And that's perfect fodder for health anxiety because it gives you something that you can think, okay, well, this is the cause of my pain. It's not actually. It's just a smokescreen. But it serves a purpose in a way in that it distracts you, again, from this alarm in your body. So if you can go to the alarm directly, you no longer need the health anxiety.
There's going to be a massive demand, or there already is a massive demand for something like this. And I know this having talked with so many physicians for two reasons. One is the new evolution of the worried well, which is exactly what you're talking about. The people that are doing well, but they're super worried, exactly what you were explaining.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be the ones that have gone to the doctor. They've come up with a hypothesis of potentially what's going on, but you need further testing.
Sure.
And then there's that waiting period. And oftentimes everyone says that time waiting and uncertainty is the worst moments of their life.
Yep. So I have a solution to that. It's basically culturing a sense of faith. And it doesn't have to be religious faith, but just a sense of faith. Like every day, I probably have, 6 or 8 really good worries going on about my business, my grandkids, whatever it is. And I will say to myself, you know what? I'm just going to leave this to faith. I'm going to resign as the general manager of the universe, and I'm just going to leave this to faith. Now, easier said than done, but what that does is it teaches you over the course of time that you can let it go. You don't need that compulsive need for certainty that you're never going to get in your thoughts anyway. So it's really that sense of, I'm just going to leave this to faith, and you just leave it to faith, and it becomes a practice. And then you see that when I just leave this to faith, when I stop crunching away at it, it just sort of starts to sort of fade. It gives it a chance to kind of just sort of fade into the background. But if I keep hammering away at it over and over and over again, it never really gets a chance to sort of resolve. So faith is just one of those things. And this is why people with religious faith tend to do better in general with anxiety and depression than people that don't, because they have this place that they can say, oh, I'm just going to leave this to Jesus or Muhammad or Allah or whatever it is. So faith has this ability to sort of offload it onto us, because a lot of what happens when we're younger, if we have trauma or if we have parents that just sort of demanded too much of us, we lose faith in the world. We lose faith that we're being taken care of. And the natural corollary of that is, oh, I guess everything is up to me then. And I'm a child. So how am I supposed to handle the world when I'm a child? I can pretend, which you and I both did and probably did quite well. But I know that I'm a child. I know that I don't have the answers to this. So of course that creates more anxiety and more alarm and more fear. So it's really understanding that, okay, can I just leave this to a place of faith? Because I'm not going to solve it anyway. In that waiting period between your test to come back, you don't have any control. So the only control you can have is sort of say, I'm going to leave this to faith. Every time it comes into my mind, oh, I hope it's not this. Nope, I'm leaving it to faith. I'm just going to. And after a while, people get very, very good at that, because you know that you don't know anyway. So you might as well put it into this faith box, because it's just as good, if not better, than any other box you could put it into. But it takes practice. It really does take practice to kind of go, I'm just going to leave this to faith. And after you get really good at it, the worries just start to lose their credibility and their intensity, because you just have this way of diffusing them so quickly. And then you teach your brain, I don't need an answer here. I don't need an answer here. I don't need to constantly reassure, because reassurance will help you for about 3 seconds until you need the next batch of reassurance. And then you're training your brain that you constantly need reassurance. And it's just this loop that you can't get out of. And this is health anxiety all over again. So one of the best things that I've ever taught myself is, I'm just going to leave this to faith. and just practice it. And you do get better at it after a while, but there's a real seduction to go back into worry, because as a child, worry did pull you away from the alarm. Worry did give you this sense that, okay, I'm going to escape this feeling of alarm in my body by going into my head. But you're an adult now. You don't need that anymore.
Mm. There's a lot to uncover there. First
I know,
off,
I tend to rant.
no, there's a like it's only going to get worse now that we have AI that can give us all the answers we're looking for instantly
Yeah.
with such confidence, even if
Yep.
it's true or not. So
Yep.
that's only going to get worse. And I'm a great example of this. I can understand the value of faith, but it's something I really struggle with.
Mhm.
And so, like for me, one to understand very analytical mind, how could I go from saying, you know what, I just have to have faith that it's going to be okay without
Yeah.
having any evidence to back that up?
I think there's meditations out there for faith that are really good, because you're basically trying to change those subcortical structures. So when you have this cortical intention, this prefrontal cortex intention, I'm going to leave this to faith, your cognitive mind will go, yeah, I don't know. But if you start penetrating into that deeper sort of body-based sense that I'm just going to leave this to something greater than me, like on top of that roof in India, I'm just going to leave, I'm part of everything. No matter what happens, I'm always going to be part of everything. I may not be in this current human form, but I will be part of everything. And I think over the course of time, you start weakening that pathway that you have to know everything. And that in and of itself sort of goes back to that child and tells that child, you know what? Back then, you were a lone wolf. You had to be a lone wolf, but you don't have to be anymore. You can see that the world generally turns out, like, look back. Often I will say to my patients, look back, look at all the times that you went through that cancer scare, or your child was in university, and you worried they were going to commit suicide. You made it through all that stuff. But yet somehow we just kind of, yeah, but that was then. You've got this, this lifetime of things going okay. And even when they didn't go okay, you were still all right. You're still here. So we have this sense, and this happens with our vulnerability mindset and victim mindset, that this time it's going to be the worst. But you've said this to yourself probably hundreds of times. So it's really developing the sense, and again, that's a cognitive perspective, right? So what I'm saying is, can you get at a feeling perspective of maybe doing some meditations of just on faith, and just every night before you go to bed, like a 10-minute meditation on faith? Because smart people tend to want to stay within their own capabilities, and they believe that they can handle it. And some of them can, some of them can't. But this is just another feather in your cap. This is another repertoire that you can use. And believe me, this has been probably the most helpful for me. It's just being able to go, you know what? I'm not going to solve this. I don't have enough information. When I get more information, when I get the test results back, when I have more information, yeah, I can worry about this, or I can start chewing on it again. But until I get more information, because nothing's going to change until I get more information, I'm going to leave this to faith. And then that becomes a pattern. And I don't know how to explain it exactly, but there is this sense, this gestalt, that you start learning, like, okay, actually when I leave things to faith through operant conditioning, they've always kind of turned out. So that starts becoming this self-fulfilling prophecy, in that you start going, you know what? I feel more confident in leaving it to faith now, because I've done it 20, 30, 40, 50 times, and it's always worked out.
The ability to be okay with uncertainty is a powerful thing.
And, you can call anxiety uncertainty, intolerance. And I tell a lot of my anxious people that it's not just surrendering to uncertainty, and it's not just accepting uncertainty. It's learning how to truly embrace uncertainty. Because again, that's the neurochemicals of empowerment. If you surrender to uncertainty, whatever, but it's really creating the neurochemicals of moving forward, empowerment, as opposed to victim. And it's just that one little thing, like looking at your anxiety, looking at, having to go out and maybe go to the dentist if you're afraid of dentists, like looking at that as a challenge for the day rather than a threat. And that really changes. I'm not big on mindset in general because I think mindset's temporary and I think it's prefrontal and I think I think it's temporary, but it's a great tool to have. And especially if you have the foundation below that of faith and confidence and faith in being able to feel whatever you feel in your body.
Russ, I could have this conversation with you for 5 hours long.
Sure.
But what I want to do is I want to make sure that we leave this, and this is a way I like to ask all my guests
Yeah, sure.
based on the topic. There's going to be a doctor, a nurse, maybe just someone listening to this that is dealing with potentially crippling anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to say to them?
That it's not your life. That it was my life. It was I considered suicide, when I ruptured my Achilles tendon, when I left medicine. So much of my identity was based on being that MD, and I thought that I would die without it. And what I've learned is being an MD is part of me, but it's not all of me. And I think we put a lot of our eggs in that basket, or a nurse, being that becomes part of our identity. And I think we get some sort of, security in that, but it comes at a cost because it's not really who you are. So if you're putting all your bank account, all your money into a bank account that doesn't pay any dividends, or just basically keeps you where you are, you're never going to grow from that. So I think it's just realizing that there's a child in you, if you're a doctor, if you're a nurse or whatever, that wanted to be this. You may not have started this way, but the way you grew up, if you were a caregiver, nursing has so many caregivers in it. So does doctors. So you'd be amazed at how many surgeons had cancer in a parent. So our life really forms around our experiences and the sensitivity of our nervous system. So I would say if you're really struggling with anxiety, you probably have a sensitive nervous system, which is very, very helpful for you once you get out of the anxiety. Then you can really start seeing who you are and embracing life. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. Being a sensitive soul is very, very helpful in experiencing life in general. But it also puts you through the ringer if your mind is constantly focused on the negative. And one of the tenets of neuroscience is that whatever you focus on, you will get more of that. So what we tend to do when we get into bad ways is we look at all the negative things that could happen. So that makes it more likely that we will think more negatively and just keep going there. So it's really about how do you connect with yourself? How do you start developing this benevolent connection with yourself so that you want to look after that child? You don't want to take that extra 12-hour shift, even though that people are asking you to. You start looking after, you start becoming your own best bet. And when you do that, Gordon Neufeld would say, come alongside. When you start coming alongside of that younger version of you and really seeing, hearing, opening, understanding, loving, and defending them, then you will start seeing where you are not doing that in your life. And you can start not doing that. And every one of those things is a win. And just really reinforcing the fact that, I didn't take that shift, or I didn't go to that dinner that I didn't really want to go to. That's a win. I'm going to stay with you. I'm going to stay with the younger version of you. What do you need from me? And just talking to that child. What do you need from me? I see you. I hear you. I'm open to you. I understand you. It all comes down to that child. It really does. It's not, I see these things about burnout. It's like, you see less patience, or we're more organized with this or whatever. It's not external. Burnout is an inside job, and it comes from the child. The child is what put us into this healthcare thing in the first place. And the child is what can extract us from it and help us stay present in it, as opposed to having to leave it. So it's really about finding that younger version of you and being able to connect with them and showing them that they're not in that old pattern where they were looking after their parents, or they're in this sort of unwinnable situation. They're not there anymore, right? So stop creating your childhood in your adulthood. Freud called it the repetition compulsion. What was normal for you in childhood, if you were a caregiver in your childhood, you will unconsciously gravitate to doing that in your adulthood. What are the patterns that you saw in your parents? And what are those patterns doing to you today? Because you are picking up the same patterns that you witnessed, right? So for me, people pleasing was one of them. Chaos was another one. I create a lot of chaos in my life. I have 15 things. If you see my desk, it's like an explosion in here. So, but I'm comfortable with chaos because chaos was normal. So I know I'm ranting here, but it's just really important if you're that doctor, that nurse that's, just at the end of the rope. Just like, what were the patterns in my childhood that I am unconsciously reproducing now? And how can I start seeing them with compassion and just seeing that the child in that did that to survive, but they're not there anymore, and neither are you. So you can come into a place where you can actually connect with them and you can see how they became who they are. And then you have a choice at that point. Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there's a choice. The more space we can create in our body, breath, whatever it is, the more silence and quiet we can create and the more space we have, the more choice we have to change it. And that's how I changed it. I've made more money as a writer and an anxiety sort of physician outside of medicine than I ever made as a doctor. Like, I think it's like 4 or 5 times the amount now, because I'm doing what I love. I'm consistent with the younger version of me. I have this great connection with the younger version of me. And I think that that's really what allows me to feel life and allows me to want to keep living, because I was at a point there where I didn't want to. I know that was a long answer, but that's basically how I feel.
I love it. Well, all I can say is thank you. Like, I genuinely enjoyed sitting down and having this conversation with you. And hopefully we can continue it going. But you know what? Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you, Spencer.